If you don't know, it tells the story of Dr. Judy and Bill Hauser's son-in-law, Rob, who tells the very true story of his life through 2015 through 2017 or so, when he has a major cardiac episode and actually flatlines for quite some time. He's brought back to life and eventually receives a heart transplant. And he has a lot of experiences through all of that that just heighten our faith and raise a lot of interesting questions for us. All of it with the background of caring for Maria, their special needs daughter, and a strenuous career that involves long hours and lots of travel and things like that. And there's one moment in that book that I'm remembering today, a moment when Rob is at home. He's just had the massive cardiac episode. He's died and been brought back to life. He encountered Frosty, whom some of you knew. And in the aftermath, he's waiting for an appointment at Duke, and he's in his backyard. The transplant isn't even really an option at this point, and he's having a conversation with his hometown priest, who he simply calls the Rev. And the Rev shows up in his backyard, and he sees Rob sitting there. Rob has this great big defibrillator vest on that's ready to shock his heart back into motion if need be. Over one shoulder is hanging the battery pack for that defibrillator vest. Over the other shoulder is hanging a bag with medicine that drips medicine on his heart at certain intervals to keep it active. He's very immobile. He's not sure what's coming next. He's not able to care for his family. He's not able to work. He's not really able to do much of anything. And the Rev comes and sits with Rob and talks with him about, you guessed it, Psalm 23. The Rev tells him God uses the circumstances in our lives to break down the ego and draw us closer to him. Then he asks him, do you remember Psalm 23? Some of it, says Rob. I know it's a favorite of many, including my mom. When she was alive, something like, although I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. Well, that's part of it, says the Rev. The part I want you to think about is he makes me lie down in green pastures. Rob asks him, how does that apply to me? Because, says the Rev, God knows that you can't do all this. God brought you back to life, and now he's forcing you, metaphorically, to take spiritual nourishment in his green pasture. That's what this verse is all about. Sheep are dumb animals. There it is. They would roam the desert and die if the shepherd didn't herd them back into green pastures where they could eat grass and drink, and human beings are no different. We run around living in fear, while all along God is using the challenges and circumstances in our lives to show us we don't control anything. I had to read that because I want to make sure I get the words of the Rev right. But isn't that true? God uses the circumstances in our life to draw us back to him and to remind us that we aren't really in control. I'm reminded of the sermon series I preached outside during Lent, where I had to say, guess what? We're not in control. The past 13 months has taught us that. In that moment, in this conversation, God was making Rob to lie down in green pastures, not asking or suggesting, making him lie down in green pastures. And as he continues thinking and praying about this teaching from the Rev, he's given a book, and he starts to read it by a different priest. It's a book called Trustful Surrender to Divine Providence. I know that book. That's a really good book. It was published in 1961, and it's by two French friars, and it talks about just letting go and letting God be in control. And as Rob is ruminating and reading and praying, he's led to a really profound understanding, and he calls it the power and peace that comes from letting go.